let's start with a brief history of the good Marshal. He was born in Sarre-Louis in the French province of Lorraine on the border with Germany. And he grows up speaking both languages. What was his childhood like? Could you sum that briefly?
Well, his father was a barrel maker in the town of Sarre-Louis. He was a veteran of the 7 Years' War. He was of German origin, but he had enlisted in, like was quite common in those days, people from across various international boundaries would enlist in various armies. So he served his time during the 7 Years' War and was discharged with non-commissioned rank, I believe it to be a sergeant. He then takes up the job of a barrel maker in the town, and he's prosperous. So Ney is brought into not a rich family, but it's not poor.
Right.
And he's educated with the friars, so he learns, he can read, he can write. He's not the simpleton that sometimes the illiterate that sometimes is presented. He's, he receives a good education from a man of his social class in ancient regime France.
Right.
And the father basically wants Ney to have a career either in the law or in the civil service. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a problem. All Ney's boyhood, Father Ney has been basically telling him stories of campaigning against Frederick the Great and stories of his time in the French army.
Right.
And Ney, and also a kind of a sense of French patriotism. In Lorraine itself, as quite common in the 18th century, the borders changed. One minute it's in France, and the other time it's back within the Holy Roman Empire. But by the time of Ney's birth, it is now part of France. It's annexed. It's part of France, and Sarre-Louis is a garrison town. So the army's all around Ney growing up, and he wants to follow. He wants to be a soldier, and his father's basically no, because I served in the army. Yes, glory, all that. However, in terms of career, your opportunities for advancement are strictly limited. You will retire as a sergeant, as I did. Right. You're not going to go any further. Right. Glory is not for common men, sort of thing.
Right.
So Ney is discouraged from enlisting, and Michel Ney is discovered from enlisting, and he becomes originally he works as a clerk in the office of the royal attorney in Sarre-Louis, and then he basically says to his father, "I'm finding this very boring. Can you find something else?" He then, for his father, gets a job in the local mines as an overseer, and then later on in a local ironworks. But that part of France, is one of the most heavily militarized parts of France. The army's everywhere because that's what the French army is traditionally concentrated on. So all the time, he will see soldiers on the roads, he will see soldiers, and he will see recruiting parties and things like that. So finally, one day in 1787, he turns up, he leaves his place of employment, turns up home and says, "I'm joining the army," which leads to a kind of scene with his father and his mum, his mother, who's very upset this idea. He's throwing away his life to follow this dream of martial glory. And he then leaves the house, slams the door, and basically walks all the way to Metz, which at the time can be described, in American terms, it would be the Fort Bragg of France, or in the country, the Aldershot. It's basically the key military base of France, Metz. Mm-hmm. He enlists in the cavalry, and I'm assuming, I think he's very much taken with the cavalry. They're the most training and the most glorious of soldiers at the time.
Okay, so the main focus of our podcast tonight is the trials in plural of Marshal Ney, and I can think of, other than Napoleon, I can't think of any other French officer who went through so much in this time period. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to briefly ask Brian about each of these trials that I found, and just get Brian's feedback on them, because we really want to focus on the 100 days, right, Brian? But before we get there, we have to go through all these other trials. I would say his first major trial occurred in the 1797 Battle of Neuilly. With just 500 cavalry troopers, Ney attacks 6,000 Austrians and holds them off for 4 hours until the rest of the French army can come up and complete the victory. Unfortunately, Ney is knocked off his horse and captured, but is later released in a prisoner exchange for an Austrian general. I mean, this just sounds amazing to me, but it sounds like typical Marshal Ney.
Well, it's very similar. I mean, as you said, he leads his brigade into the thick of the Austrian cavalry facing them. In the hand-to-hand fighting that follows, he's knocked from his saddle. He's then fighting on foot, and a group of Austrian dragoons capture him, and he goes down fighting. He literally has to be clubbed into submission, sort of thing. Then, now, Ney is someone who he regards himself then as a failure, but he's given reassurance by key French commanders. No, this is, you're now a legend. He was already a legend beforehand. I mean, he'd established a reputation before this, but he was saying, no, this is, no one's criticizing you. These things happen.
Right, and I also like that even though he's a general at this time, the guy is still as tough as nails, still has an iron constitution. He's not just sitting back on his laurels as a general, commanding from far away.
No, not at all. And the Austrians regard him with awe. I mean, he's from his commission after Valmy all the way up to this period. He's been in constant battle with the Austrians and the other coalition armies. He's been constantly in the field, and he's become a legend not only to the ordinary French soldier of the armies which he served in, but also across the front line. He was, right. He had a, he struck, I say fear, but also respect into his opposite numbers. So he was a known man, and they obviously it kind of again it enhanced his reputation as an honourable soldier.
Yeah, and I think that's something that maybe some people don't realize is during this time, especially in Europe, especially when Napoleon comes around, these marshals become legendary, like worldwide. Now he's not a marshal yet, but he's still known, like you said, throughout enemy armies and across the continent at this time.
Oh yeah, it's a small world. The soldiers fighting amongst the professional soldiers of the various armies, and right. Ney is seen. He's, as you said, he's constantly in the front line. He is on the front lines all the time. He's always leading from the front. So in the heat of in the thick of fighting, he was a figure. Right. He was always there, and on the opposite side of the line, he was, as I said, a known figure. So again, this incident kind of enhances his reputation. So when he is exchanged back to France, even though initially he must have felt a failure, he felt just depressed, maybe, that his military career, had faced this, he was treated with a kind of, as a sign, as a returning hero almost, because it was seen as this military exploit, with such a small force to basically hold it back. Right. Superior force, and then lead this charge, and until reinforcements arrive, and so he actually returns to the French army with an enhanced prestige.
Okay, well, let's jump to his next trial that I have down here, and in 1800 he leads a division this time at the famous Battle of Hohenlinden, which goes down as a victory for the French and their commanding officer Moreau. But I think Ney and some of the other junior officers to Moreau, Grouchy, played a pretty big part in this battle, correct?
Oh, very much so. I mean, Ney, it's his first serious experience as a divisional commander. And the Austrians attack, and it's a very poor Austrian battle plan. They attack in piecemeal, so the attacks are focusing on Ney's division, and he's repulsing them. And Moreau comes to him and says, "Do you need reinforcements?" And the coolness Ney displays under fire is like, no, I'm fine here. I'm just going to mount a counterattack, and right. All the time he's holding he's pinning the Austrians in place, right. While Moreau has got this flanking movement going on. Robespierre is going around the flank of his division, and we have this moment where just at the moment when that flanking movement attacks the rear of the flank and rear of the Austrian army, Ney orders a bayonet charge, and Grouchy and other divisions follow through as well. So it rolls up the Austrian army almost like a carpet,
right? And
it is one of the most decisive French victories of the Revolutionary Wars.
Yeah, I just pointed out because Moreau seems to get a lot of the credit, but I think there was other.
The principal field commander is Ney. Ney is in his element. He's on the front line. He's cool, he's under fire, and he's inspiring his troops. He's joking with them. He's riding down the line. Everything's like he's in control of the situation. No matter what the Austrians are doing, he's holding them back. He's launching his counterattacks. He's keeping his division intact, and he waits until that he senses the battlefield. And at the right time, at the right moment, he launches his attack, and wins the battle. And then he receives a summons to attend Paris. And there's two things. One, he has a reputation which Napoleon wants. Because Napoleon and Ney have never encountered each other.
Right.
They've basically worked in different fields, different fronts of France's war.
Mm-hmm.
They know each other only by reputation. Ney had never had dealings with Napoleon, nor vice versa. So Napoleon's going entirely on what he's heard of Ney. So and Napoleon at that time he wants to remodel the French army. The French army's general officer corps. He's inherited a mass of generals, and he wants to sift through them. He's got generals who were formerly officers of the king. He's got generals who came up through the ranks of the Revolutionary Volunteers. He's got generals who he knows are sympathetic to his political rivals, and he's sifting through them. So he has this meeting in Paris, and Ney goes in thinking he doesn't see anything of it. He comes in, and the meeting's pretty kind of very dry, and there's no real flash. At some point, Josephine arrives, and we have to think that maybe she knew about Ney beforehand, but she comes in, and by all accounts, the meeting changes very much. So Napoleon, Ney, that the ice is broken, and they have a very good meeting.
Right.
And Josephine clearly keeps Ney in mind, because it then leads to
his marriage.
The marriage with one of her ladies in waiting, Algae. Josephine has basically has match made him Algae. Algae, his wife, Madame Ney, as later, she's of the aristocracy, the minor aristocracy, which became an issue later on under the Bourbons. But her father was a professional civil servant. He was Louis XVI controller of finances, which must have been a very interesting position to be at the time of the French Revolution, as the French treasury was bare. The mother had been a lady of the bedchamber, and in the kind of one of many of Marie Antoinette's various types of ladies. She wasn't of high aristocracy. She was, as I said, of minor aristocracy. So, but she was working as a chambermaid in the palace, which again was used against Algae by certain ladies of the Bourbon court. She, the mother, unfortunately, was very affected by. They were imprisoned. The father, Algae, and her mother were all imprisoned under the Revolution. And when the news of Marie Antoinette's execution happened, the mother took her own life. I believe she threw herself down a stairwell. And Josephine and Algae, obviously, I think they were in the same prison together. So there was a relationship between them. And Josephine basically, was obviously at a time when marriages were arranged. She basically said, "Well, there's General Ney, handsome, brave. He's got prospects."
Right.
And the first meeting doesn't go well because Algae thinks Ney's a bore. He hasn't got much small talk. He turns up in his hussar whiskers and pigtail. The kind of the uniform of the French hussars at the time, and it doesn't go well. So Josephine takes Ney in hand, basically tells him, smarten up, get rid of your silly whiskers, get rid of your pigtail. This is a beautiful woman, show some interest. And I think she probably has a chat with Josephine, with Algae, and said, just give him a chance, sort of thing. And subsequent meetings go very well.
Yeah.
Ultimately get married. And by every account, it is a very happy marriage.
We'll come back to Algae. Because I do want to get to her, especially in the 100 Days. We'll come back to that. 'Cause I want to put a pin on that because I want to talk about his next trial, which is he's dispatched to Switzerland. France has kind of taken it over and made it the Helvetian Republic. And Napoleon asked him to tactfully put down any rebellion or revolts there and bring the Swiss under French control. And I think this shows his diplomatic acumen, which he doesn't get enough credit for.
No,
he does it pretty
well. He does it very well indeed. He's given a clear guidance from Talleyrand. Basically, they don't want a military confrontation in Switzerland. And I think the Swiss warmed to Ney. So when they avoid conflict, he brings in the dissident elements in Switzerland, and is able to convince them of Napoleon's benign intent towards Switzerland, and it is seen as a roaring success.
Yeah,
and any rattling the sabers done in a very kind of veiled way, and the Swiss warm to Ney.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because, we're going to talk about a lot about his battles, but he did have, he spoke German. He, as you said, he could read and write. He was a smart man. And I think he gets kind of painted with a brush that he was just kind of a...
He's always been regarded as unintelligent.
Right.
You constantly see references to him being an unthinking man of action. He's very much kind of a man of limited intelligence. And there's literally no evidence of that at all. He wasn't an intellectual. He was, and he wasn't classically educated either. But he certainly wasn't the kind of simpleton which is sometimes has been depicted by over the years. Mm. And he did have a brain. He did have a think, but he obviously had his own mindset. He was a soldier first and foremost. Mm. Diplomacy wouldn't have been his chosen task. If Napoleon, he'd rather have a fighting command. Mm. But when given this mission, and it was given the kind of clear parameters how to perform it beforehand, he did it superbly.
Yeah, I agree. The next trial, I mean, he did. We're going to kind of skip through Austerlitz and Ulm because I want to get to, obviously, there's so much to get to with Marshal Ney. Is the 1806 Battle of Jena. And I think one of Ney's problems with leading from the front is sometimes he couldn't see the forest through the trees.
Oh, no. It's Ney at his worst because he arrives late. His corps is strung out behind him. So he arrives at the field of Jena with a small force, the advance guard of the corps, which is about 2 regiments, but certainly I believe a brigade strength. Mm. And he has no role at that time in the battle plan because his corps is not in position.
Right.
And he's frustrated, and the blood goes to his head, and he leads his advance guard forward without any orders into the battle.
Right. No orders, just looking for glory.
Charges ahead.
Yep.
And it is, I think he's as a soldier, it's his worst moment because it's his own, he's very brave, and but he leads his men into a very tight corner. They are cut off. They are surrounded by the Prussians. And he forms a square and he holds them back. And if the other marshals hadn't come to his assistance, he would have been overrun and defeated. And he doesn't respond well to criticism. He doesn't kind of acknowledge his failure. He becomes very defensive. Napoleon deals with him quite kind of generously, possibly too generously. And he basically and through others basically tells him, yes, you're very brave. However, I expect you to behave in accordance with my orders and instructions, and not just go off and And there's a quote about him behaving like the last joined drummer boy sort of thing.
But I think Ney heeds Napoleon's criticism because at the next trial, the 1807 Battle of Friedland, he waits for his orders. He waits for Napoleon to give him the okay, and it's very late in the afternoon in that battle.
Oh yeah,
and we'll get to that. But I mean, in that battle, he's phenomenal.
Oh yes, as famously Napoleon's observing him through a spyglass and says, this man is a lion because Ney's on his charger and his men he's basically just cool under fire, and he's leading the attack, and everything is perfectly aligned. So the corps which he's personally trained, and he's leading them forward, and he's showing no concern at all with the fire around him, sort of thing. And he's he's joking with his troops, he's inspiring all those little tricks of leadership. Right. He's showing no concern at all.
Right.
And he's urging on the soldiers in this attack. And as Napoleon said, that man is a lion. And and even the other marshals are saying, "Oh my, this man is remarkable." And I think as a corps commander in a Napoleonic campaign, it is probably his finest hour.
Yeah, and
it is the one where it's pivotal in Napoleon's victory.
Yeah, they pushed the Russians basically into a river, and that's why, Tsar Alexander agrees to the Treaty of Tilsit, is that devastating loss that he and Lon and again Grouchy and Napoleon lay on the Russians right there. But that you're right. That's probably like his best battle loss. That might be one of his high points. His next trial, though, is in Spain, and I think this is very hard for him because it's an unpopular war against guerrilla forces. He does okay, but his heart isn't into it because there's no glory to be found in Spain, don't you think?
No, I would agree entirely. I think he's not comfortable in Spain at all. Even during the original invasion with Napoleon, Napoleon's going on the basis of maps. Ney's finding that it's very hard going because the terrain is very, and he's taking time and he's criticized. So immediately he's being criticized. Why are you taking it? And he's finding that unlike that, he's fighting, and not only is he fighting the Spanish army, he's fighting the Spanish people.
Right.
And messengers are disappearing and their bodies are being found. And guerrillas are appearing, and they're picking off French patrols, they're picking off French messengers, they're attacking French outposts. And it strikes against Ney's idea of honorable soldiering, that he's fighting against a people.
Right.
And he's never comfortable. And and when Napoleon leaves Spain, he then has to work alongside other marshals. The lack of Napoleon's guiding influence, the marshals are fighting their own separate battles, sort of thing, their own separate campaigns, and they won't cooperate.
Yep.
You then have later on Messina is brought in as commander-in-chief, and Messina, by the time of his appointment, is not the Messina of the 1790s. He's tired, he's worn out. He didn't want the appointment. He has a very flamboyant love life, and he brings one of his mistresses dressed as a French cavalry officer.
Right.
And this offends Ney's kind of sense of propriety, because he basically says, well, you're here to be the commander-in-chief, what are you doing flaunting your mistress around?
Right.
Messina famously also has a very loose interpretation of private property.
Right. Yeah.
And he kind of presents to Ney these telescopes, which has been taken from a Spanish observatory, as a gift. And Ney promptly returns them to say, Marshal Ney doesn't accept stolen property.
Yeah, it must be one thing that you have to serve under a man who's the same rank as you, but when that man is looting the country, not putting effort forth, it must have been very frustrating for Ney.
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, when Messina retreats and Ney takes over the rearguard, it is superb. His performance in the field, directly in contact with Wellington,
right,
is first class, and it shows you just he raises himself to the occasion. He puts aside his animosities, and the French infantry and the French soldiers, that they adore him for that, because he's constantly he's always doing personal reconnaissance. He's taking over. If there's one thing he knows how to do well, is to lead a rearguard. However, he will not leave it alone with Messina. He's insubordinate to a degree which is, and Messina finally has enough of him and relieves him from his command.
Right.
And 6th Corps is Ney's corps. It's the corps he's built since the camp at Boulogne. He's trained it. They know him. They love him. By all accounts, it's not a melodramatic. They revere him.
Right.
And and we have a very emotional departure. It is a horrible campaign in many ways. It's a brutal, horrible campaign.
Yeah.
In lots of ways. And Ney's record in it isn't as bad as other marshals. There's one episode where he withdraws from Galicia, and he orders the countryside to be burned. So his line of retreat is burning villages, burning towns. Now there's no suggestion. There's never been that there was any killing of the populations. The populations were evacuated, but he's burning the villages and the towns behind him as he withdraws. In a record of him over 20 years of service, it really is the only episode when you can actually say to Ney that was poor showing. I think it is a blot on his record.
Indeed. And A lot of these men had blots on their records, especially the marshals, but I think Ney had fewer than most. Well, let's talk about what is probably his second biggest trial of all time, and that would be the 1812 invasion of Russia. He performs well on the attack, going in Smolensk and Borodino, but he really makes his name in the retreat from Moscow. How would you like to summarize his rearguard actions where he became, quote, the bravest of the brave?
He takes over from Davout the role of guarding the rear of the Grand Army as it retreats. And there is a confusion. There is some sort of mix-up with orders. Right. So he's left behind and he's surrounded or cut off by a superior Russian force. And he's basically summoned to surrender. And he says, no, marshals of France do not surrender. Mm-hmm. And he then attacks and he leads a charge straight at the superior Russian force.
Yeah, he was outnumbered like 8-1, right?
Yeah, and he attacks again and again.
Yeah.
And he somehow, and he's not able to break through, but he then basically regroups and he goes around them, sort of thing. So he's then on the move, sort of thing, pursued by the Cossacks. And pretty quickly, concepts of regiments, battalions, companies have ceased to exist. It's basically a mass of men that he's able to form into a fighting force, and he's gathering stragglers to him. They try and cross a river, and the ice breaks famously, and we see Ney leading a human chain of men into the freezing water to drag out, personally to retrieve from the water to men. So he saves lives.
Right.
The wounded are left behind to the mercy of the Cossacks, and you can imagine what happened then.
Yeah.
And he then continues. So it is frankly, it is something out of Homer, isn't it? He basically just retreats, makes a stand, falls back, makes a stand, falls back, musket in hand, and his men are dying all around him. As I said.
And Napoleon thinks he's done for, right? Like
they all do. People cannot believe that he's still fighting, and he's fighting the elements. He's fighting the most terrible conditions at the same time, under constant attack from the Cossacks.
Right.
And by doing so, he's buying time. He's holding back the Cossack cavalry from attacking the main body. He's attracting all the attention of the Russian army, and when the rearguard dies around him, he gathers another one.
And then, is it Prince Eugene or someone there? He gets a messenger somehow to Napoleon that he's evaded the Russians and he's coming up.
Mm. And famously, the army, the spirit of the army is lifted. The fact that the Ney is alive, and they meet. Eugene's able to. They're able to. To relieve him. Mm-hmm. So then we have the river crossing. I can't put it.
Berezina. Yep.
Now we have this famous where Oudinot is holding the rear guard. He's trying to hold back the Russians, and he's wounded. And Ney takes over command and holds back the Russians.
Yeah.
Now, was he told to, or did he just spontaneously? I personally, I don't think. I think he basically just rode over and took command.
Yeah.
And this is what, as Marshal Ney says later, he actually saves. He does. The fact that he's able to hold back with whatever forces he can gather, the Russian infantry, to allow as many people as possible. Because it isn't, as we know, it isn't just the soldiers; it's their camp followers as well across the bridges.
Right.
The fact that any do as many as they do is down to Ney.
Yeah, it's just incredible. Next trial, Brian, Ney gets out of Russia, and there's the German campaign of 1813, and there's some good wins, Lutzen and Bautzen, but he suffers a defeat outside of Berlin against his former brother Marshal Bernadotte. This must have stung his pride a little bit, don't you think?
It was. I mean, and again, it's Ney's failing as a general, that he will go to his comfort zone. And Ney's comfort zone is leading from the front. Mm-hmm. So he's an army commander, and he's in the thick of the fighting. And he believes that there's a gap in his line. It's similar to Rosecrans at Chickamauga. He believes there's a line. There's a hole in his line, which isn't. So he orders
Yeah, Oudinot, yeah.
To redeploy. And the staff at Oudinot point out that if you do that, we're going to open up a massive line, and the Bernadette, the Swedes and the Prussians are going to go straight through us. But Oudinot, who is unhappy with being relieved, to put, I think it's best. He is unhappy at being relieved by Ney, obeys the order, and it basically causes a massive gap, and the Prussians. It's Bernadette in command, but the Swedes are nowhere near. And they do all the fighting, and they're not very happy about Bernadette claiming the victory. But
yeah,
the difficulty with that whole battle is that Ney isn't acting as an army commander. He's behaving as a captain of dragoons, as a captain of grenadiers. I think Renier later on, he behaved like a lieutenant wrapped in a general's cloak.
Right.
He's behaving like a second lieutenant. It's not what his role is to be.
Right.
And it is routed. It is an appalling defeat, and one of several defeats of the marshals at that time. I think Oudinot gets defeated. Van Damme gets defeated.
MacDonald, yeah.
MacDonald gets defeated. And it's around that time when the plan is that when the marshals are in the field attack, when Napoleon's in the field withdraw,
right?
They know they've got the measure of the marshals. They know they can beat them,
right?
And Ney is just yet another defeat, which Napoleon takes to heart. So Ney feels that defeat very badly.
His next trial is the 1814 invasion of France, where he eventually has to tell Napoleon that he should abdicate. After Napoleon insists they march on Paris to eject the Allies.
He believes that he's saving France from civil war. He believes that in case Napoleon did march on Paris. He's also looking around the state of the French armies at the time. What are they fighting with? Old men and boys. The French armies at that time are in no position to win, and more suffering. So he's basically, it is an act of civic courage to say to Napoleon, we can't win here. You have to abdicate.
Yeah.
And Napoleon never forgives him.
Napoleon goes off to Elba on his first exile. The Bourbons return under Louis XVIII. What is Ney's role?
Ney basically says to the 18th, if you want to preserve your authority, then keep the imperial guard, keep the guard as your royal guard. And Louis XVIII initially agrees, and then basically effectively disbands the guard and scatters it. So he also the Bourbon senior nobility have no time for Ney.
Yeah,
they despise him.
Yeah, he's not an aristocrat. Yeah.
They see him as a jumped up sergeant. Right. So he's sidelined very immediately. The Bourbon princes, the Duke of Artois, the Duke of Alba, all the Duke of Berry, they want the army to themselves, and their idea is to basically rebuild the French army into the army of the ancient regime. Right? They have no understanding of France. They have no understanding of the French people, and most significantly for Ney, they have no understanding of the French army at all.
Right.
And Ney is aghast that we see veterans being discharged in their thousands. We see officers being passed over promotion, and instead promotions are given to emigres who had basically either not seen any action at all or had served in foreign armies, which offended Ney. He doesn't understand. He's bewildered by that.
Right.
And then, of course, then you see the treatment of his wife. So,
correct.
The Bourbons bring back to the Tuileries Palace the etiquette of Louis XIV. The court etiquette, and Ney is constantly being treated, in his view, disrespectfully.
Right.
So he withdraws from court. The problem is his wife. Algae had, under the Empire, been one of the leading lights of the Napoleonic court. She was someone, a hostess, a society lady, balls, and she believed that she could continue this under the Bourbon
regime, yeah.
And of course, not at all. That they despise her. The ladies in the court cut her. She's ostracized. They don't recognize her.
Right.
The Duchess, Louis XVI's surviving daughter, she despises anyone connected to the French Revolution. She despises. She has no love at all for the French people, let alone people who served, and she regards it, and she basically says, "Oh, you're Algae, you're the chambermaid's daughter," and things like that. So she completely cuts down Algae again and again until there's a famous episode where Algae returns to the house in Paris and she's in tears and very upset. And Ney, who's, he's been writing letters to the Chamberlain to say, can you please stop my wife being disrespected? Can you please ensure that she's treated with respect? And they're just ignored.
Right.
And Ney, and Algae is sensitive. And I think it's connected to the fact that one of the reasons it's connected to the fact that she had been a prisoner under the revolution. So whatever happened in the prisons, there's a sensitivity to that. So she's put to bed, and Ney makes his way to the Tuileries Palace. And you have, it's like something out of you could write a film about this, couldn't you? You have this idea of the Swiss guards presenting arms because he's Marshal Ney, and that's what you do. You have the courtiers of the court running around, not knowing what to do, and he walks into the royal presence of Louis XVIII, who's eating, as you can imagine, and he bows respectfully to the king, and then turns around, walks towards the Duchess and her ladies in waiting, and in what has been described as barrack room invective, tells them what he thinks of them.
Right.
And very, and that's the end of Ney in the court of Louis XVIII.
Yeah.
And rightly so. I mean, he basically has enough of them. Says, right,
Right.
And he withdraws from court. He withdraws from public life, and he's bitter. And he's bitter. And he's as we going on to, he's in his country house when the news of Napoleon's return.
All right, let's talk about that. So Napoleon returns in 1815 from Elba and gathers up a small force of his supporters, and Ney is dispatched to stop his return. Now, this must have been an agonizing time of decision for Ney. I mean, he really legitimately had three options. He could feign sickness like Massena or Oudinot and just stay home. He could go with the king into exile like MacDonald or Victor, or he could rejoin Napoleon. I mean, that must have been a tough decision for him.
Oh yes. There was no reason, for him to go to the Tuileries Palace and to basically tell Louis XVIII that he will return Napoleon in an iron cage.
Mm.
That is Ney being Ney. Ney dramatic. Ney. He's basically presenting himself as the savior of France. That I'm the man to stop civil war. I will meet Napoleon, and
Right.
The problem Ney has is that all around him, the French administration, the French army is falling apart. Mm-hmm. Literally, he takes a force of between 3,000 and 6,000 men to meet Napoleon. He finds that literally he will send. He's receiving no instructions from Paris. The Bourbon princes are in the field and frankly withdraw immediately. All the other marshals, as you say, are either are resigning or feigning illness. So he's sending messages of support to various commands across France, and is receiving no answer.
Right.
He's cut off. He's receiving no information, no instruction, and he's receiving reports all the time of mass defections, of tumultuous crowds, regiments defecting, and he's thinking, what do I do?
Right.
If I raise a musket to Napoleon, am I going to spark off a civil war?
Right.
And he knows also the quality of his troops. He's lived a long time amongst the French soldiers. He can walk amongst them. He's hearing their mutterings of discontent. He's got the Bourbons, his number two.
Right.
Who, and he was not the most reliable of
no.
Right. And he's not receiving any sort of support from his own officers. He's isolated, a very isolated position. And of course, he then receives what is Napoleon's a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Napoleon sends those two imperial guards to him, and they say, "I will meet you as I did on the eve on the aftermath of Borodino." And Ney is just like, what am I going to do here? Everyone loves Napoleon. I'm not hearing any reports of resistance against him. My soldiers are in disorder. Everything's in disorder. Am I the man that's going to spark a civil war?
Right.
So he parades his army, and he announces that we're going to join Napoleon.
Right.
And the army breaks ranks around him, but I think his reaction is, I've made a terrible mistake. I'm doing this, and then he regrets it. I think with Ney, from that point, he regrets doing this because he's broken his bond, he's broken his word.
Yeah.
He's not like the other marshals who basically had political illnesses. He made a stand. He told Louis XVIII, "I will return Napoleon to Paris in an iron cage."
Yeah.
And then he basically breaks his word, and he again withdraws from Napoleonic public life and goes to his country estate.
Yeah, but as we all know, on the eve of Waterloo, he rejoins Napoleon.
Yeah.
To fight in the pivotal battle, which is a loss for the French and the end of Napoleon's empire. How do you think he performed in this epic?
Well, I think that the problem we have is Napoleon, because he distrusts Ney. He doesn't want if Napoleon had other options, he would not have summoned Ney to active duty.
Right.
Ney wasn't the kind of man at all to remain tending his rose garden when France went to war. So he was going to answer any summons. You know, he was always going to. He was basically like a trumpet call to an old war horse. He was going to respond.
Right.
Yes, a wiser man would have stayed home, but Ney is Ney. And he finally joins the army when they're already on the march. So it is a strange decision of Napoleon to appoint, to basically give Ney such a pivotal role, a pivotal command of an entire wing of his army at such a late day in the campaign. It's not, you know, it shows you one of the examples of Napoleon not at his A game. Why would you do that?
Well, yeah, and there's a saying like the worst time to take over command of your new army is the day before a battle.
Oh yeah. Ney doesn't know who his regiments are. He doesn't know who his commanders are. He doesn't have grip, and that lack of grip manifests itself, I think, as the campaign goes on. You see, Quatre Bras, he doesn't know where his forces are. He's got forces strung out all over the place. He only has one part of his force, and Quatre Bras is where you see the impact of all this on Ney's temperament, because you see him raging in the battlefield. He's doing what Ney does. He's leading attacks. His horse is shot from under him, and then you see the confusion over de Lorien's corps, and he just rants and raves, and completely loses his temper, and behaves foolishly, because by ordering de Lorien to bring his corps back. De Lorien firstly shouldn't have obeyed that order. He was a corps commander. He should have had he should behave as one and act and use his own judgment.
Right.
But bringing the corps back at such a late stage in the march, it achieved nothing. And that was Ney, again, losing the wider picture.
Yeah.
For his own rage, for his temper.
He did prevent the British from joining up with the Prussians.
Oh, he did. He fights with the forces he has. He fights a very effective holding action, definitely.
Agreed.
Oh yeah, and the use of cavalry, because he uses whatever means he has, and Kellerman's cavalry charge was very effective at just stabilizing the front. So in tactical terms, Ney does perform well. However, again, you see the flashes of temperament and temper, and this sense that this is a man under enormous pressure. And I think as the campaign continued, then you have Waterloo. And again, it goes back to the idea of you don't get any sense of Napoleon bringing Ney into his confidence. Bonapartists have always said that Ney ran amok, sort of thing. Well, what was Napoleon doing exactly? This is the cavalry, for example. We have this straight idea that Ney just leads a massive French cavalry without Napoleon knowing about it. Well, I don't think so. Then you have the idea of the second wave of French cavalry, which were basically the Imperial Guard cavalry, which would only have been committed under the instruction under the direct order of Napoleon. So clearly Napoleon, if the charge had worked, Napoleon would have claimed credit for it.
Right.
Fortunately, it didn't. And the French cavalry tradition, all those French cavalry commanders were quite happy to say, well, we failed because Ney was out of control, and it was all disjointed and the rest of it. Ney, I think if you break down his performance at Waterloo, the capture of La Salliante, he's brilliant. The combination of infantry and artillery, and he takes the farmhouse, and what would be divisional level? It is frankly superb. The attack, the leadership of the Imperial Guard attack. He's still on his feet, amazingly, after 10 cavalry charges and being shot, 4 horses shot from under him. It is how he's still on his feet is a testament to his iron constitution. He's
agreed.
He's amazing. So he leads the guard in, Is he responsible for the Well, I don't think the guard would have broken Wellington's line anyway. I think it was a desperate last hope sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have the rout, the breaking up of the ground of the army.
Right.
Ney is desperately trying to rally, and he's not. I don't think he's trying to get himself killed. He's being Ney. He's doing what Ney does best, which is to rally faltering troops. So the army is in rout.
Yeah.
He then returns to Paris because he sees only chaos. Literally, the army's, he arrives back in Paris and he's an absolute state. He's a physical wreck sort of thing. And you then have the moment where he, in the eyes of Napoleon, betrays him a second time because he stands up in the Chamber of Peers. And just as Carnot is reading a report saying everything's fine, everything's regrouping.
Right.
We've got lots of reserves. We've got lots of, and he stands up and says, "Rubbish. Everything's. We haven't got this. The Allies are 3 days march outside Paris. Paris we put to siege. We haven't got anything to stand against them. Everything's in disorder."
Right.
And the Bonapartists accuse him of treason. They regard him as betrayal. And it breaks up any last support Napoleon has to fight on.
Yeah, well, let's jump into his final trial. He is accused of treason by the returning Bourbons. And it's a very complicated military tribunal first, and then a later trial of Ney in the legislature. Do you want to briefly touch on that?
Yeah, the problem is, I think, for Ney, is that he doesn't have the best of relationships with his fellow marshals.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't. I don't think any of them are friends. I think he's a socially. I think you could regard Ney as socially awkward. He doesn't enjoy close friendships with his peers, and he thinks that they're going to basically bring out old grievances against him, sort of thing, and basically throw him to the wolves. Foolish, they say it's foolish, but that's what he believes.
Right.
The marshals themselves don't come out of this very well.
No.
Davout basically is the best. I think, to be fair, Marshal Moncey's wonderful letter to Louis XVIII in its original form. There were other versions circulating around Paris, but the original letter is a very moving thing indeed.
It is.
He says that he's a brave man and he's saved so many French lives. You can't do this, and I'll happily take whatever punishment you give me, but all save honor is lost. And Louis XVIII rewards Moncey for that letter by breaking him, by busting him from the marshalate and imprisoning him, which was obviously, I think, from the pressure of the Bourbon ultras, but also sends a message to the marshalate to say, we expect you to, we will not tolerate any public support for Ney.
Right.
So a court martial is formed, and Davout says not even Marmont will pass me, which is,
Right. We find that out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes even sadder when you read about Marmont's the way he misleads Algae, that he will speak up for Ney at the final hour. It is. You can understand why the Paris mob wanted to lynch him in 1830. You really can. You really can. And
here's what I think. I think, like he said at his execution, I fought 100 battles for France and none against her. So I think in his mind, he's not a political animal. He doesn't know how that works. He just probably thought, there's no way they're going to convict me for any wrongdoing. And he was way off.
No, it was. I mean, he failed to understand that the Bourbon. I said the Bourbon ultras wanted his head. Basically, it was a judicial murder. They wanted him dead, and the gathering of and I think a lot of the marshals had pressure on him and pressure put on them. Kellerman, for example, the elder, his son was a wanted man. The others, I think, some of them were always Bourbon, Petier, people like that, were always after him. So there was a complete lack of. There weren't a band of brothers, Napoleon's marshals.
Right.
And I think Ney's trial kind of sums it up, really. The defense lawyer tries a desperate thing of, he knows the way it's going. He can see the way that the court is being loaded against him. Beaumont lies. Beaumont, his number 2 at the time of the defection, he basically presents a false account of what happened.
Right.
Ney stands up and goes, "What are you doing? You're a liar," basically.
Right.
And and says, this is so obvious, I know what's going to happen now, but I wanted you're a liar.
Yeah.
Who, to his eternal credit, and he's told not to do it. He's basically said, if you give evidence on behalf of Ney, it's over for you. And Davout, being Davout, turns up and basically says that the treaty I negotiated with the Allies gave pardon. This, everyone, this was not meant to happen. Marshal Ney or nobody else was covered by the provisions of the Treaty of Paris. This should not have happened.
Right.
And the minute he leaves court, he's basically removed from the ranks of the Marshalate. His estates are confiscated. He reduced, in status and rank.
Yeah, he's destitute.
And eternal credit, he frankly doesn't care about that. He says, well, for a man he didn't actually like. I mean, they weren't friends.
Yeah.
But they weren't friends. Ney had spoken scathingly of him in Russia. He felt he hadn't supported him during the rearguard action.
Right.
But Davout did have a sense of honor, and he basically felt, well, Ney would probably do it for me, so I'll do it for him, sort of thing. And finally, the defense lawyer tries a desperate gambit to say, actually, Charleroi now is German territory. It's Prussian territory.
Mm.
So Ney is a German or Prussian. He's not eligible to be under justice. And Ney stands up and says, "No, I'm a Frenchman. I'm born a Frenchman. I'll die a Frenchman."
Right.
And it brings the court uproar. But there is no doubt, if you read the accounts of the trial, that it was never going to go Ney's way.
Oh yeah.
That they wanted him dead.
Yeah.
And it was a judicial killing, which proved to be a disaster for the Bourbons. Louis XVIII famously said, "Oh God, why didn't he escape? Why didn't he leave Paris when he had time?" I think it's because Ney was in a very low state in terms of his spirits, and he also had nowhere to go. I think Ney really had reached the end of his tether.
Right.
And for him, it was a last stand. He was either going to be acquitted or he was not. And because he had nowhere to go. The idea of him becoming an exile in America is just it's a complete ahistorical. It's completely contrary to what Ney was. This foolish idea and also the idea of Wellington somehow had some sort of sentimental desire to save Ney. No, Wellington would never lifted a finger for Ney. He's despised by the Bourbons, who want him dead, but many Bonapartists they regarded him as Napoleon's betrayer, as the man who lost Waterloo. He doesn't have any friends at all. He's he's only after he was shot. I think the moment he was shot, he became obviously had a massive impact on. It was, as I said, it was a disaster for the Bourbons. Louis XVIII, I think, realized the impact it would have. You don't shoot the bravest man in France, and expect your regime to be respected.
Marshal Ney is condemned to death by firing squad. He's killed in December 1815. What do you think his legacy is, looking back on it now?
I think in terms of military history, Ney is regarded as one of the great battlefield commanders, one of the great leaders of men in battle. I think if you look for all history, he is one of those leaders that has the inspirational leader of men in battle. Mm-hmm. If he's the man you want to, if you want to take a hill, you use Ney. If you want to hold a hill, you use Ney. If you want a desperate rearguard action, you use Ney. If you want to hold men together in the most impossible of odds, you want your Marshal Ney.
Yeah, I agree.
He is that sort of man. I think yes, he was a corps commander, but I think he was most comfortable at the divisional level. A command of 10,000 men. I think Napoleon has got he would always go down to his comfort zone, which was frontline leadership. Mm-hmm. So, and I think most of his worst mistakes all of his errors as a commander were due to him forgetting his role. He would go down to the level he was most comfortable at, which is the tactical fighting role, the frontline combat officer.
Right.
So his legacy, it's not a bad legacy at all. In terms of, I think I was certainly one of the great leaders of troops in history.
I agree, and
that would be very much my view of him.
And I think he's a personification of every private has a marshal's baton in his kit bag.
Yeah. I think he would always, if he'd lived his life, if he died in his bed, I think he would have had like all the marshals a footnote in history. But the way he died, the bravery, there's some unbelievable bravery of him.
Yeah.
And how he faced death.
Yeah.
And how and there is no other word but tragedy. The killing of Ney is a tragedy for France. It should not have happened. It was malicious. It was vindictive, and it didn't benefit the Bourbons at all. It was an absolute disaster for them.
And I think when some of the memoirs came out, especially about Russia, I think a lot of people in France didn't realize all that he had done there.
Oh, no. There's a famous story, is there not, of the Duchess who, crying, found weeping in the Tuileries Palace because she's reading an account of Ney in Russia, and she tells her lady, if only we had known that we would have saved him, we wouldn't have allowed him to be executed.
Right.
And it divides France. This is one of the reasons why Napoleon III, Louis the Philippe, who was very sympathetic to Ney, and then later Napoleon III, were quite cautious rehabilitating Ney, because so many of the aristocracy of France were implicated in voting for his death.
Yeah.
It was an embarrassment. But it's a wonderful sculpture in France, the statue that was unveiled.
Yeah.
Very interesting. It sums up Ney very well, I think.
Yeah. Well, Brian, that was some episode. Thank you so much for that.
I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No. I thought it was fantastic. I appreciate you being on the show. One more call out on your Twitter page, because you have some good content up there. People can find Brian Williams on Twitter.
They can, yes. Yeah, it's Brian BRIW74. There's a picture of Marshal Ney as my avatar. So, yeah.
I like it. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Very much indeed. Thank you. Absolute pleasure.